She sat at a table full of people who believed she was nothing, and she let them believe it. For 2 years, Serena had swallowed their contempt like broken glass, smiled through dinners that felt like executions, and kept a secret that could have destroyed every single person in that room. Tonight, Luca's mother leaned across the white tablecloth with that familiar smile, the one that never touched her eyes, and asked, loud enough for everyone to hear, whether Serena had finally figured out how to stop spending her husband's money. The room went quiet. Serena set down her fork. If you want to know what happened next, stay until the end. Like this video, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning Serena met Luca DeMarco, she was running late, soaking wet from a broken umbrella, and carrying 3 bags of groceries that were slowly losing the battle against gravity. She didn't know his name yet. She didn't know what he was. She just knew that when one of the bags finally gave out and sent a dozen oranges rolling across the rain-slicked sidewalk on West Huron Street, the man standing outside the black SUV didn't laugh. He crouched down in his expensive suit and started collecting them without being asked. That was the first thing she noticed about Luca DeMarco. He didn't hesitate. Most men would have watched, maybe offered a sympathetic half smile, kept walking. He just dropped to one knee on a wet Chicago sidewalk in what she would later learn was a $1,200 suit and picked up her oranges like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You've got a hole in the bottom," he said, handing her the bag. "I know." She looked at him. Dark eyes, strong jaw, a scar that ran thin and pale along his left cheekbone. Not conventionally handsome, something harder than that, the kind of face that had been tested. "You need another bag." "I have another bag. It's also ripping." She looked down. He was right. Of course it is. He didn't smile, just reached into the back seat of the SUV and came back with a reusable canvas bag with the logo of some Italian restaurant on it. He held it out. She hesitated. A stranger's bag on a stranger's street from a stranger who looked like trouble in the best possible way. "I'm not going to kidnap you over a bag of oranges," he said. That's exactly what someone who was going to kidnap me over a bag of oranges would say. Something shifted in his face then. Not quite a smile, but close. The first crack in the stone. "Fair point. Keep the bag either way." She took it. That was how it started. Not with candlelight or clever conversation. With rain and broken bags and a man who didn't think twice about getting his knees wet. Serena Whitlock had been living in Chicago for 4 years by the time she met him, and in those 4 years she had constructed her life with the kind of deliberate care that came from having once had everything handed to her. The apartment on North Damon was small, 2 rooms, thin walls, a radiator that clanked through winter like it was personally offended by the cold. She had a job she liked at a mid-size architecture firm, drafting work mostly. Occasional client presentations when her supervisor was feeling generous. She paid her own rent. She bought her own groceries. She had a bank account that held exactly enough and nothing more. She had left behind a bank account that held more zeros than most people saw in a lifetime. That wasn't something she thought about often, or rather, she had trained herself not to think about it, the way you train yourself not to press a bruise, not because the bruise wasn't there, but because pressing it served no purpose except pain. Her family, the Whitlocks of Boston, Connecticut, and about a dozen international addresses, had been confused when she left. Her mother had been hurt. Her father had been disappointed in the particular quiet way that men like her father expressed everything. Through absence, through the slow withdrawal of warmth. Her brother Miles had been the only one who understood, and even he had said, "You know you can't actually disappear, Serena. The name follows you." She had proved him almost wrong. She had kept the name because changing it felt like cowardice. But she had stripped everything else away. The accounts, the cards, the connections. If someone ran a background check on Serena Whitlock in Chicago, they'd find an architectural draftswoman with a clean record, a modest income, and no remarkable history. The Whitlock dynasty, with its multinational holdings and Fortune 500 adjacencies, existed in a different universe, a universe she had chosen to leave. She had her reasons. She didn't owe them to anyone. 1. Luca called 3 days after the oranges. She didn't know how he got her number and told him so when she picked up. "I asked the woman at the front desk of your building," he said. She's not supposed to give that out. She recognized me. Serena sat with that for a moment. That's not reassuring. I know. She should have hung up. She knew enough, even then, about what it meant when people recognized a man on sight in certain neighborhoods of Chicago. She was not naive. She had grown up around powerful men, and she understood that power had flavors. Some of it was corporate and sanitized, and some of it was older and raw and moved differently through a room. But she didn't hang up. She said, "What do you want?" "To take you to dinner." "You don't know me. I know you argue with strangers in the rain, and you still said thank you for the bag." "That's a very low bar." "Most people clear lower," he said. She went to dinner. The first 6 months were careful. That was the word for it. Careful. Luca was not a man who rushed, and Serena was not a woman who gave herself easily. Their early dates were long and quiet in the way that meant both of them were paying attention. He took her to places that weren't ostentatious, a jazz bar in Wicker Park, a Polish diner in Avondale that had been there since 1974, a walk along the lakefront in November that neither of them had dressed warmly enough for. He told her what he was. Not everything, not all at once, but early enough that she couldn't claim she hadn't known. "My family has certain business interests," he said one evening, his voice completely flat, the way voices got when they were reciting something they'd recited before. "What kind of interests?" He looked at her directly. "The kind that don't get discussed in detail." She held his gaze. "The DeMarco family." A beat. "You know the name. I grew up in places where certain names got said in certain ways. I know what it means when a room gets quieter." He watched her for a long moment, gauging something. And I'm still here," she said. That was the second thing she noticed about Luca DeMarco. He never lied to her. He omitted, he was careful, he had walls the size of cathedrals. But he never looked her in the eye and told her something that wasn't true. She could work with walls. It was the lies she couldn't tolerate. By spring, they were something real. By summer, they were what her colleague Dana described as completely, embarrassingly gone on each other, which Serena thought was an overstatement but didn't argue against too hard. He was difficult. She needed to be honest about that. Luca DeMarco was controlled, often cold in public, occasionally unreachable behind some internal wall she couldn't see over. There were nights he canceled without explanation, and mornings he came back looking like he hadn't slept, and she learned not to ask what she didn't want answered. He had obligations she wasn't part of, and a world she only glimpsed at the edges. But when he was with her, he was entirely with her. That was the thing. He listened the way people forgot how to listen, without waiting for his turn to talk. He remembered small things. He showed up when he said he would. He never made her feel small. After 2 years of dating men who made her feel small in various creative ways, she had forgotten that was possible. She had not told him who she was. She told herself she was waiting for the right moment. She told herself it wasn't relevant. She told herself it would complicate things. The truth was simpler and harder. She wanted, for the first time in her adult life, to be chosen for herself. Not for her family name, not for her fortune, not for what she represented as an alliance or an access point, just for herself. For Serena, the woman who argued with strangers in the rain and said thank you for borrowed bags. She knew it was a risk. She knew there would be a reckoning. She chose to ignore both of those things for as long as she could. Whoa. The DeMarco estate sat behind iron gates on a private road outside the city, north of the lake, surrounded by old trees and older money. The first time Luca took her there for a family dinner, Serena sat in the passenger seat of his car and watched the gates open in the headlights, and felt something tighten in her chest that she hadn't felt in years. Not fear. She'd grown up inside gates like those. Recognition. The house was exactly what she expected, sprawling, formal, decorated with the specific brand of wealth that wanted you to feel it before you stepped inside. Italian marble in the entry, family portraits that stretched back 3 generations, staff who moved through the rooms with the particular practiced invisibility of professional household workers. She recognized all of it. She had grown up in a version of it. Viviana DeMarco was waiting in the sitting room. She was in her mid-60s, still striking, dressed with the careful deliberateness of a woman who understood that appearance was a weapon. She had Luca's dark coloring and none of his stillness. She was all movement and assessment, her eyes sweeping over Serena with the speed and efficiency of someone checking inventory. "So," Viviana said. She didn't stand up. You're the girl. Luca's jaw tightened slightly. Mama, this is Serena. I see her. The eyes didn't warm. Sit down. Serena sat. She smiled. She kept the smile exactly the right temperature. Not cold enough to seem hostile. Not warm enough to seem desperate. Viviana asked about her work. Her family. Where she was from. Serena answered everything honestly. The drafting job, the Chicago apartment, the fact that she'd grown up on the East Coast without specifying what part or what circumstances. She answered everything honestly and left out the things she wasn't ready to give. Viviana listened with the expression of someone slowly confirming a suspicion. Bianca arrived halfway through the appetizers. Luca's younger sister was 31, beautiful in an expensive and effortful way, and had apparently decided before setting foot in the room that Serena was not worth the adjustment of her expression. She sat down, looked across the table and said, I thought you said she worked in an office. She does, Luca said. You can tell, Bianca said, with a light smile that was as sharp as anything Serena had encountered. Serena said nothing. She picked up her fork. Raphael arrived after the main course. Luca's uncle, a wide man with silver hair, and the kind of settled certainty that came from decades of being the most dangerous person in most rooms. He sat at the head of the table where Luca's father would have sat, if Luca's father were still alive, and he looked at Serena with an expression she recognized immediately. It was the expression of a man doing arithmetic, adding up what she might cost against what she might provide. Luca tells me you're from out of town, Raphael said. Originally, yes. Your family? My family is back east. Doing what? Serena met his eyes. Various things. Raphael looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Luca. Something moved between them. Conversation conducted entirely without words. And then Raphael picked up his wine glass and returned to talking to someone else, as though Serena had already been evaluated, filed, and found insufficient. She got through the dinner. She drove home with Luca, her hand in his, saying very little because she was using all available energy to keep her face neutral and her voice steady. That night, alone in her apartment, she sat on the edge of her bed and pressed her hands flat against her thighs and breathed. She had survived dinners with senators, cocktail parties with the kind of old money that predated the country itself. She had sat across from men who controlled governments and women who collected corporations the way other people collected shoes. She had never felt smaller than she did in that room tonight, and she hadn't even done anything wrong. Quote. Over the following months, the dinners continued. Serena went because Luca asked and because she refused to be driven off by discomfort. She had made a decision to be part of his life, and she was not a woman who retreated from decisions. But the DeMarco family did not ease. Viviana's comments arrived wrapped in the language of concern. You must find it difficult keeping up with Luca's world. Said with a soft voice and eyes that meant something else entirely. I only wonder whether someone from your background can truly understand what this family carries. Said at a dinner table with 8 people listening, not one of them moving to intervene. Bianca operated differently. Quick, bright, surgical. She complimented Serena's clothes in ways that made the compliments feel like indictments. She referenced events and places and names that Serena was presumably meant to not recognize, watching with barely concealed satisfaction when Serena stayed quiet. The irony was that Serena had been to most of those places and knew most of those names and could have unraveled Bianca's social architecture in about 4 sentences if she'd chosen to. She didn't choose to. She was playing a different game, one she hadn't fully articulated even to herself yet. Raphael was direct in the way that powerful men got direct when they thought they were out of earshot. At a family gathering in October, Serena overheard him talking to one of his associates near the library. She's after the money, Raphael said. Obviously, a woman that age, no family connections anyone can verify, works a nothing job. She found herself an opening, and she's taking it. Luca seems serious about her. Luca is serious about everything. That's not the issue. The issue is that when he's done being serious, we'll be left cleaning it up. Serena stood in the hallway with a glass of water in her hand and her pulse completely steady. She thought about correcting him. She thought about what his face would look like if she walked in there and told him exactly what her family controlled, what her name actually meant, how many of the buildings his operation touched down on, were owned by Whitlock-backed investment entities. She thought about the specific silence that would fall over that room. She kept walking. Not yet. She didn't know when, but not yet. She needed to see how deep it went first. She needed to know the full shape of what she was dealing with. That was what she told herself. She was still telling herself it when Luca got down on one knee in her apartment on a Tuesday night in November with a ring that was not showy. Just precise, clean, exactly the kind of thing she would have chosen herself, and asked her to marry him. She said yes before he finished the sentence. He laughed. Actually laughed. One of the rare full ones that she cataloged carefully because they were not frequent. "You didn't let me finish. You didn't need to." He put the ring on her finger. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at him. "Your family is going to be a problem," she said. "I know. I'm telling you that in advance. I know that too." "And?" He looked at her with those dark, level eyes. "And it doesn't change anything for me." She wanted to believe him. She did believe him. She just also knew, with the particular knowledge of someone who had grown up inside powerful families and understood how they worked, that loving her was one thing, and withstanding his family's sustained opposition was something else. Love was a feeling. Family was an institution, and institutions had inertia. She was right. The engagement dinner was Viviana's idea, hosted at the estate, framed as a celebration. Serena had accepted the invitation the way she accepted most things from this family, with grace on the outside and both eyes open on the inside. It was not a celebration. The guest list included 3 of Viviana's closest friends, 2 of Raphael's associates and their wives, Bianca and her boyfriend Marco, and an older couple named the Conti family, who Serena gathered held some significance in the DeMarco social hierarchy. Everyone was dressed beautifully. The table was set with the kind of precision that required staff. The wine was very good, and from the moment Serena walked through the door, the room was arranged against her. It was subtle at first, the kind of subtle that required attention to notice, a conversation that stopped when she approached, a compliment about the ring that included a pause just long enough to suggest it was being evaluated rather than admired. One of Viviana's friends, a woman called Chiara, asked Serena 3 separate questions about her family background in the first 40 minutes, phrased slightly differently each time, as though she were checking for inconsistencies. By the main course, it had stopped being subtle. Viviana addressed the table, not Serena directly, the table, which was somehow worse, and said, in a voice that was performing warmth while delivering something else entirely, that she hoped Serena understood what she was stepping into, that the DeMarco name carried obligations, that Luca's position required a partner who could hold that weight, that she only worried because she cared. Serena held her wine glass and said quietly, "I appreciate the concern." "We all just want what's best for Luca," Chiara offered, to appreciative murmurs. "Of course," Serena said. And then Bianca, sitting 3 seats away with a bright smile and a glass of Barolo, said clearly and deliberately enough that no one at the table could pretend they hadn't heard, "I just think it's interesting. She's very pretty, obviously, but pretty runs out. And when it does, what exactly does she bring to the table? Because from what I can see, all she has is a drafting job and a Chicago apartment, and Luca can do significantly better than that." The table went quiet. Luca's hand moved under the tablecloth and found Serena's knee. Serena looked at Bianca. She held the look for a long, full moment. She thought about the 17 things she could say. She cataloged them, assessed them, let them go one by one. Then she set her napkin on the table, pushed her chair back, and stood up. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice didn't shake. "I need some air." She walked through the house to the back terrace, stood in the cold November air, and pressed both palms flat against the stone railing. Her hands were not shaking either. She was surprised to notice that. She had expected shaking. What she felt instead was something colder and quieter, a slow settling, like sediment dropping to the floor of still water, something shifting from one container to another. She had been patient for a long time. She had been patient because she believed it was the right thing. She had bitten down on every response and swallowed every truth and kept herself small so that no one could accuse her of using who she was. But standing on that terrace in the dark, she understood something clearly for maybe the first time. Her patience was not changing them. It was not earning her anything. It was not making Luca's family better people or giving them reason to reconsider or providing any of the outcomes patience was supposed to provide. It was just costing her. The question was no longer whether to tell them. The question was when and how, and whether she wanted to do it in a way that simply informed them or in a way that they would never, not once, not for the rest of their lives, forget. She was still standing there, working through the answer, when the terrace door opened behind her. She expected Luca. It was Raffaele. He came to stand a few feet away, looking out over the dark garden, and was quiet for a moment before he spoke. "You should go home," he said. Serena turned to look at him. Not tonight necessarily. He kept his eyes on the garden. "I mean, in general, you should go home and not come back. I'm telling you this plainly because I think you're an intelligent woman, and I think you understand plain language better than the soft version my sister-in-law delivers." He paused. "Luca cares about you. That's real. But Luca also has obligations that extend past what he feels in the present moment. This family has a structure. That structure requires a specific kind of partner. You are not that partner." Serena was quiet. "This isn't about you personally," Raphael continued. "You seem like a decent person, but you come from nowhere we can identify, you have no standing we can verify, and you have nothing to offer this family except Luca's affection. And Luca's affection has created problems before. Is that a threat?" He finally looked at her. "It's an assessment. They tend to look the same from where I'm standing." Something crossed his face. Surprise, maybe? Or a recalibration? He studied her for a moment. "You're not afraid of me." "No. Most people are." "I know." She held his gaze. "That tells you something about the people you usually deal with. It doesn't tell you much about me." He was still looking at her when she turned and walked back inside. She found Luca in the hallway, coming to find her, his expression carrying the tight, controlled look she recognized as his version of fury. "What did he say to you?" "He told me to go home." Luca's jaw set. "He wasn't wrong that I should," she said. "Tonight, I mean. Tonight, I think I should go home." Serena. "Not because he's right." She touched his face with one hand, just briefly, her palm against his jaw. "Because I need to think, and I can't think in there." He drove her home. They sat in the car outside her building for a long time. He didn't apologize for his family. She hadn't asked him to, and they both understood that apologies for other people's behavior were a form of currency that lost value fast. He just held her hand and let the silence sit. "I'm not going anywhere," she said finally. "I know. But something has to change." He looked at her. "Tell me what you need." She looked back at him in the dim light of the car, this man with his scarred cheek and his careful loyalty and his impossible family, and she thought, "I need you to see what happens when I stop hiding. I need to know if you're going to be standing next to me when I do." She didn't say any of that. She said, "I need a little time." He nodded. He always understood when she meant it. She got out of the car, walked up to her apartment, sat down at her kitchen table, and opened her laptop. She spent 3 hours pulling documents she hadn't looked at in 4 years. Corporate records, holding portfolios, ownership structures buried under 7 layers of corporate entities. She found everything she needed. She organized it into a single file. Then she closed the laptop, went to bed, and lay in the dark thinking about what her mother had told her once. Years ago, when she was old enough to understand what the Whitlock name actually meant. "Power isn't something you perform," her mother had said. "It's something you choose to reveal. The performance is for people who need to be impressed. The revelation is for people who need to be corrected." She hadn't thought about that in a long time. She thought about it now. The wedding happened on a Saturday in March, small by DeMarco standards. 60 people, a civil ceremony followed by a dinner at a restaurant Luca had rented out entirely. Viviana attended in a dress that was 4 shades more formal than the occasion required, which Serena interpreted correctly as a statement. Bianca was a bridesmaid because Luca had asked, and she performed the role with precise photographic pleasantness, warm in every picture, cold in every moment between them. Raphael gave a toast that was technically complimentary and contained, embedded within it, exactly 3 sentences that were not. Serena drank her champagne, smiled at her husband, and filed everything away. The months after the wedding were better in some ways and worse in others. Luca was a good husband, present, honest, reliable in the ways that mattered. They built a life that was, in the private hours of it, genuinely good. She expanded her role at the firm. He continued whatever he continued, the parts she didn't ask about in detail, the obligations that took him away at odd hours and brought him back with the weight of decisions she didn't want to carry. But the family remained. Dinners, events, the slow accumulation of small cruelties that Viviana deployed with the consistency of someone who believed she was performing a service. Bianca's commentary, always just this side of deniable. Raphael's assessments, delivered to other people in rooms where Serena was meant to overhear them. She endured it. She told herself she was choosing to. She was starting to wonder if that was still true. The invitation arrived in April, 6 months into the marriage. A family dinner at the estate. Viviana had written it herself, on actual stationery, which Serena found either charming or ominous depending on how she held it. A chance for all of us to come together. I hope we can begin moving forward as a family. She read it twice. She showed it to Luca. He read it with his face doing nothing at all. What do you think? He asked. She thought, I think this is a trap. She said, I think we should go. He looked at her. There was something in his expression that she couldn't read, which was rare. After 2.5 years, she could read most of his expressions. Something careful there, watchful. You sure? Yes, she said. She went to her desk. She opened the folder she had assembled 4 months ago and added 3 more documents she had requested from her family's attorneys. She reviewed the complete package once. Then she put it in her bag. She was sure. She just wasn't sure they were ready for what sure looked like. The evening of the dinner arrived with the kind of spring weather Chicago delivered as afterthought. Gray and damp, the lake making itself felt. She dressed carefully. Not overdressed. Not underdressed. Exactly right. She put on the ring that had been her grandmother's, the one she never wore to DeMarco events because it was too distinctive, too specific, the kind of piece that prompted questions she hadn't been prepared to answer. Tonight she was prepared to answer. Luca looked at the ring when she came downstairs. He looked at her face. He said nothing. They drove to the estate in silence, her bag on her lap, the folder inside it. Whatever was waiting for her inside those gates, she was ready. She had always been ready. She just hadn't decided yet whether they deserved to know it. Tonight, she had decided. The gates opened the same way they always did. Slow, deliberate, the iron parting like something that had been waiting. Serena watched them through the windshield and felt the folder against her thigh through the leather of her bag and said nothing. Luca drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the center console between them. He hadn't reached for her hand tonight. She hadn't reached for his. They were doing that thing they sometimes did when they were both thinking hard, existing in parallel, close enough to touch, neither one crossing the distance. The house came up through the trees, lit from below the way Viviana liked it, golden and deliberate. 3 other cars already in the drive. Serena clocked them automatically. Bianca's white Mercedes, Raphael's town car, a third vehicle she didn't recognize. Dark sedan, clean plates. Someone new. She noticed Luca notice it too. The slight stillness that moved through him when something didn't match his expectations. Who else is coming? She asked. Family dinner, he said, which was not an answer. Luca. He parked, turned off the engine, sat for a moment with his hands in his lap, looking at the house. Raphael mentioned the Conti brothers might stop by. The Conti brothers. She ran the name against what she knew. Old family, old alliance, the kind of guests you invited when you wanted witnesses to something, or muscle behind a conversation you expected to get difficult. That's not a reconciliation dinner, she said. He looked at her. No, he said. I don't think it is. She waited for more. He didn't give more. That was the edge of the territory he shared with her. Right there, at the point where his world and her world stopped overlapping. He had always been honest about where that edge was. She had always accepted it. Tonight it sat differently. Are you going to tell me what you think this actually is? She asked. A long pause, the kind that meant he was choosing between 2 versions of the truth. I think my uncle wants to put pressure on something. I don't know exactly what. On me. He didn't answer, which was its own answer. She picked up her bag. Then let's go inside, she said. Viviana met them in the entry hall, dressed in deep navy, pearl earrings, the full presentation. She kissed Luca's cheek. She looked at Serena and said, "You look well," in the specific tone that meant she was cataloging everything: the dress, the shoes, the ring. Especially the ring. Serena watched Viviana's eyes stop on the ring for exactly 1 second longer than they should have. A flicker of something. Not recognition, not quite, but alertness. The way a person's face moved when they encountered something that didn't fit the file they'd been maintaining. "Thank you," Serena said. "You've outdone yourself with the house." "I always try," Viviana said, and led them in. The sitting room held Raphael, 2 men Serena didn't know. Late 40s, similar coloring, the squared-off build of men who had spent their lives in rooms where size communicated something. And Bianca, perched on the arm of a chair with a glass of something sparkling, and the specific brightness she wore when she was performing. Her boyfriend Marco was absent tonight. Serena noted that too. One of the unknown men stood when they entered. "Luca." His voice was flat and warm at the same time, the way some men in certain professions learned to speak. Everything surface, nothing underneath visible. "Good to see you." "Carlo." Luca shook his hand. The grip held a half-second longer than a greeting required. "This is my wife, Serena." Carlo Conti looked at her. Not the way men usually looked at her. Not assessment of the social variety. Not the quick categorization Raphael always performed. Something more specific, more professional. "Mrs. DeMarco," he said. "Mr. Conti," she said. His brother, introduced as Enzo, nodded from his chair without standing. His eyes moved from Serena to Luca and back to Serena, doing arithmetic she wasn't entirely meant to see. Raphael rose. He was wearing the satisfaction of a man who had arranged something and was watching it begin. "Serena, glad you came." He said it the way you said it to someone you'd expected to cancel. "Of course," she said. They moved to the dining room. The table was set for 8. There was one more guest still apparently expected, and Serena took her seat next to Luca and put her bag on the floor beneath her chair with the specific, ordinary care of a woman putting down a bag, which is to say no one in the room would have looked twice at it, which is exactly what she intended. The dinner began with the social performance. All such dinners began with surface conversation, the kind that filled rooms without filling them. The Conti brothers spoke to Raffaele about matters that existed in soft language, the kind of language that meant something specific to everyone in the room and nothing specific to no one who might be listening. Bianca spoke to no one in particular, and everyone in general, the way she always operated, maintaining a kind of ambient noise that made silence harder to achieve. Viviana served the role of conductor, watching the table, managing the tempo, ensuring that things moved in the direction she had set. Serena ate. She drank water instead of wine, which she saw Bianca clock with a look that wanted to be significant. She spoke when spoken to and offered nothing extra. She was conserving something, though she couldn't have named it exactly. Attention, maybe. Focus. The 8th guest arrived during the soup course. He was older, early 70s, silver-haired, the kind of man who entered rooms already occupying them. Serena didn't know his name, but she knew the type with a precision that came from a lifetime of exposure. Old money, specific connections, the particular confidence of a man who had never once in his adult life been the least important person in any room he'd chosen to enter. Viviana brightened. Edmondo. Finally. Edmondo Ferrara, introduced with a last name and no further context, which itself was context, settled into the empty chair at Viviana's right hand and looked around the table with the unhurried gaze of a man arriving at something he'd already been briefed on. His eyes landed on Serena, stayed there. She returned the look with nothing on her face. He smiled, and the smile didn't reach anything. "The wife," he said, to Viviana more than to Serena. "Luca's wife," Viviana confirmed, with precisely the inflection that made those 2 words carry weight in opposite directions. Luca's hand moved under the table and found Serena's knee. She didn't move toward it or away. She kept her face at the same temperature. It escalated the way these things always escalated. Not with a single moment, but with accumulation. A comment here. A silence there. The Conti brothers asking Serena questions that were framed as curiosity and structured as interrogation. Where had she grown up exactly? What had her father done? Whether she had siblings? Whether her family had ever had dealings in the Northeast? She answered with the same careful truth she'd always deployed. Selective, honest within its limits, offering nothing that wasn't asked for. She was aware that the table was watching her answer. She was aware that her answers were being evaluated against some standard she hadn't been given. She was also aware, with a clarity that felt almost physical, that this was the setup. Whatever was coming, this was the ground being prepared for it. Edmondo Ferrara leaned forward during the main course and said, with the pleasantness of a man who had practiced pleasantness until it was indistinguishable from menace, "I understand your family is from the East Coast." "Originally," she said. "What part?" "Various parts. We moved around." He cut his meat with precision. "I ask because I know most of the significant families in that region, and I don't recognize the name Whitlock." The table was very quiet. Serena looked at him. "It's not a name that requires recognizing," she said. "No?" His tone was gentle, surgical. "Most names don't, but the ones that come into contact with families like ours tend to leave traces, and there are no traces of yours that anyone has been able to locate." She let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. "You looked. Raphael asked me to make some inquiries. As a courtesy." He said it with complete comfort, as though this were entirely ordinary. "These things are standard when a family is considering long-term arrangements." "The marriage already happened," Luca said. His voice was quiet and flat and extremely dangerous. Edmondo glanced at him. "Yes, which is why the inquiry is somewhat overdue." "There was nothing to find," Serena said, "because I have lived a private life. That's not the same as having nothing." "Of course not." The smile again. "But you'll understand that in our world, private life and concealed background are difficult to distinguish from each other, especially for a woman with no verifiable family connections, no financial history that—" "Edmondo." Luca said it once. Just the name. But the sound of it moved through the room like something with mass. Edmondo stopped. The table held its breath. Luca set down his fork. He looked at his uncle. "What is this?" Raphael met his nephew's eyes without flinching. He had the confidence of a man who had prepared for this exact question. "It's a conversation that should have happened before the wedding and didn't." "It's not a conversation, it's an ambush. Call it what you want." "The question stands." Raphael looked at Serena now, directly, with the full weight of a man who had decided the performance of subtlety was no longer necessary. "Who are you, really? Where do you come from? What is your family?" "Because we have looked, Serena. We have used every resource available to us, and what we have found is nothing. And in my experience, nothing means something was deliberately put there." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Serena had heard all evening. She was aware of Luca beside her, the quality of his stillness, the kind that preceded something. She was aware of Bianca across the table with wide eyes and slightly parted lips, the expression of someone who had known this was coming and was enjoying the arrival more than she expected to. She was aware of Viviana at the head of the table, hands folded, watching with the composed expression of a woman who had planned a dinner party and was watching it proceed according to plan. She was aware of her bag on the floor beneath her chair. She was aware that this was the moment. Not the one she had planned. She had planned something else, something of her own choosing, on her own terms, but the moment that had been chosen for her. She breathed. "You looked," she said. Her voice came out steady. "Not warm, not cold. Even." "Yes," Raphael said. "You hired someone to investigate my background. We asked questions through appropriate channels. And you found nothing." "We found nothing," he confirmed with satisfaction. "And you've concluded from that," she said, "that I'm hiding something." "Haven't you been?" Viviana's voice from the head of the table, soft, almost kind, the knife inside the velvet. "From the very beginning, you've never been fully forthcoming about your background, your family, your life before Luca. A person with nothing to hide doesn't—" "Mama!" Luca's voice. "No." Viviana looked at her son with genuine, wounded feeling, or its perfect imitation. No, Luca, you have given this woman your name, our name, and none of us, not one person at this table, knows a single real thing about who she is. That is not acceptable. That has never been acceptable. Serena looked at Viviana for a long moment. Then she looked at Luca. He was watching her with an expression she had never seen on him before. Not the controlled fury he wore when his family pushed too far. Not the steady loyalty he wore when he stood beside her. Something rawer. Something that looked for just a moment like uncertainty. That was the thing that moved her. Not Raphael's interrogation. Not Edmondo's surgical pleasantness. Not even Viviana's performance of maternal concern. It was that flicker in Luca's face, the first time she had ever seen him look at her and not be completely sure. That was what they had done to him tonight. That was the actual target. Not her. Him. She looked at her husband's face and she thought, they're going to use this moment against him forever. They're going to say he looked uncertain, and they're going to feed that uncertainty until it becomes something else. Unless she did something about it right now. She reached down and picked up her bag. Serena, Luca started. Give me a moment, she said. She set the bag on the table. She opened it. She removed the folder, the one she had assembled 4 months ago and added to and reviewed and carried here tonight in the specific hope that she would not need to use it this way. She had wanted to choose the moment. She had wanted it to be hers. She set the folder on the table in front of Luca. I was going to tell you this differently, she said. To him. Only to him, even though the entire table was watching. I was going to tell you privately, on my own terms when it felt right. Tonight is not that moment. But these people, she glanced around the table, once, brief and comprehensive, have decided that my silence means guilt. So, she opened the folder. The first page was a corporate ownership document, the Whitlock Group, LLC, registered in Delaware, operating entities across 11 countries. The second page was a subsidiary structure, 43 companies, ranging from technology infrastructure to luxury real estate to private equity. The third was a condensed asset summary that her family's attorneys prepared annually for estate purposes. She pushed it across to Luca. She watched him look at the first page. The second. His face did nothing for a long moment, the absolute stillness he used when his mind was moving very fast. Then he looked up at her. She held his gaze. My name is Serena Whitlock, she said. My father is Conrad Whitlock. My family has operated the Whitlock Group for 3 generations. Our domestic holdings are valued at approximately $9 billion. Our international portfolio brings that considerably higher. She paused. Let it land. Some of the commercial properties your family operates, Uncle Raphael, are on Whitlock-titled land. I can provide the specific addresses if you'd like to compare. The room was completely silent. Raphael had gone very still, the kind of still that happened when a body was absorbing something the mind hadn't caught up to yet. Edmondo Ferrara's fork was suspended between his plate and his mouth, and he seemed to have forgotten it was there. Bianca's bright social expression had simply stopped, like a power cut. Everything switched off, the performance collapsed to nothing, just her face, confused, recalibrating, suddenly young-looking in a way she never usually allowed. Viviana had not moved. She was looking at Serena with an expression that was difficult to read because it was too many things at once. Shock, yes, but underneath it, something else. Something that in a different woman might have been recognition. The particular recognition of one calculated person encountering another and understanding too late that they had badly misjudged the situation. Luca was still looking at the folder. Serena watched him and felt something she couldn't name move through her chest. Not triumph, nothing that clean. Something more complicated. The particular ache of a truth that should have been told sooner, offered now because it had been forced rather than chosen. Luca, she said quietly. He looked up. His face had settled back into stillness, but the quality of it was different. Not the controlled blankness he used in professional situations. Something more interior. She watched him look at her the way she had watched him look at things he was genuinely trying to understand, with his full attention, without the protective layer of assumption. Why didn't you tell me? He asked. His voice was very quiet, not angry. Something more difficult than angry. Because I wanted you to choose me without knowing, she said. I wanted to know what I was worth to you when you thought I had nothing. He looked at her for a long time. Around them, the table remained in its collective paralysis. Raphael still processing, Edmondo still frozen, Bianca still somewhere between expressions, Viviana watching her son's face with something that finally looked like something other than calculation. Luca set the folder down. He stood up. "We're leaving," he said. "Luca," Raphael began. "Not tonight." He looked at his uncle with a flatness that ended the sentence before it continued. Then he looked at his mother. Then around the table. A single, slow sweep that covered everyone and said nothing. And somehow said everything. He picked up the folder. He held out his hand to Serena. She took it. They walked out of the dining room, through the entry hall, out the front door into the cold spring air, the gravel under their feet, the dark sky above the lit-up house. His car was where they'd left it. He opened her door. She got in. He went around and got behind the wheel. He didn't start the engine immediately. They sat in the dark, in the car, in the driveway of his family's estate, with the folder on the back seat and the lights of the house behind them, and the gate still closed at the end of the drive. She waited. He said, 9 billion. Closer to 12 with the international assets. A silence. And you've been living in a 2-room apartment in Wicker Park for 4 years. North Damon, and yes. Another silence. Longer. Serena. He said her name the way he rarely said it, with all 4 syllables landing separately, like he was looking at each one. I need you to tell me, right now, tonight. Was any of it real? She turned to look at him in the dark. All of it, she said. Every single piece. He looked at her for a long moment. She could see the work happening behind his eyes, the reassembling of 2.5 years through a different lens, checking each memory against this new information, testing for fractures. She let him do it. She didn't rush it. She owed him that much. Finally, he reached forward and started the engine. The gate at the end of the drive began to open. Behind them, through the rear window, she could see the front door of the estate was open, and Raphael was standing in it, watching them go. His shape was dark against the light from inside. He wasn't moving, just watching. Serena faced forward. The gate finished opening. Luca pulled through it without stopping, without looking back, and drove them into the dark road beyond. She didn't know what the morning would bring, what he would feel when the shock settled, what questions would come, what the version of her he'd constructed over 2 years looked like, now that it had been rebuilt from. The apartment felt different that night. Same walls, same radiator ticking in the corner, same narrow kitchen with the light that buzzed slightly when you first turned it on. Nothing had changed in the physical structure of the place. But Serena stood in the middle of the living room with her coat still on and felt the difference the way you felt a shift in air pressure, not visible, not nameable, just present in the chest and behind the eyes. Luca had driven her home without speaking. Not the comfortable silence of 2 people who didn't need words. The other kind. The kind with mass and temperature. He'd parked outside her building. Their building now, officially, though he kept the house on Dearborn that functioned as his operational base, and sat with the engine running for a moment too long before turning it off. She'd waited. She was good at waiting. I need tonight, he'd said finally. Okay. Not because I'm... He stopped, started again. I just need to think. I know. She touched his hand once, briefly. He didn't pull away, but he didn't turn his palm over either. Take the time. She got out. She went upstairs. She stood in the living room in her coat and thought about the expression on his face in the car, that quality of a man taking inventory, cross-referencing, looking for the thing that didn't add up so he could decide how much it weighed. She understood it. She didn't blame him for it. But understanding and blaming were 2 separate countries from the feeling that moved through her now, which was something quieter and more corrosive than either. She had always known this moment would cost something. She had just believed, had let herself believe, that she would control the terms of it. She had not controlled the terms of it. Raphael had, and that was the part she couldn't put down. She didn't sleep well. She woke at 4 in the morning with the particular alertness of a mind that had kept working without her, and lay in the dark listening to the city and following the thoughts where they went. Luca hadn't called. She hadn't expected him to. She'd told him to take the time, and she meant it. But in the space where sleep should have been, Her mind kept returning not to Luca, but to Raphael, to the dinner, to the specific architecture of it. The Conti brothers, Edmondo Ferrara, the 8-person table assembled with the precision of an argument rather than a meal. He had prepared that. He had spent resources on it. He had brought in outside witnesses with enough standing to validate whatever conclusion he intended to reach, which meant he was building towards something. Not just an interrogation, not just a confrontation, something with a next step. She sat up, turned on the lamp, reached for her phone. No messages from Luca. One from her brother Miles, sent at 11:30 the previous night, which meant 9:30 Pacific and which read, "Call me when you can. Not urgent, but also kind of urgent." She stared at that for a moment. Miles had a specific definition of urgent that differed from most people's. His not urgent, but kind of urgent usually meant something was already in motion. She called him. He picked up on the second ring, which meant he was awake, which was not a good sign given the hour. "Serena." "What happened?" A short silence, the kind that meant he was deciding how to start. "Did you use the documents last night?" She went still. "How do you know about last night?" "Because I got a call this morning from Franklin Guys." Franklin Guys. She knew the name. Old Boston legal family, 3 generations of corporate law, the kind of firm that appeared in footnotes rather than headlines, the kind of firm that worked for families like the DeMarcos when they needed things done in the language of contracts and liability. "Guys called you," she said. "At 7 this morning, he was very polite." Miles paused. "Serena, someone has filed a motion in Cook County Court to contest the validity of your marriage on grounds of fraudulent misrepresentation." The room was very quiet. "Who filed it?" she said. Her voice came out flat, and she was distantly aware that this was the body protecting itself, going to 0 temperature to keep everything else functioning. "The filing lists the petitioner as Viviana DeMarco." Another pause. "But Geis made the call, which means Raphael." She was already standing, already moving to the desk. "He planned this before the dinner. He had the filing prepared, and he used the dinner to create the evidence for it. The investigation, the witnesses, the conversation on the record." Her hands found the edge of the desk, and she pressed her palms flat against it and breathed. "He used our conversation as evidence of concealment. The argument is that you withheld material information about your identity and financial status during the formation of the marriage contract, which constitutes fraud under, I know what it constitutes." She closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds, opened them. "Miles, tell me what the exposure is." He was quiet for a moment in the way of a man who had already worked this through and didn't love the answer. If it proceeds, and they find a sympathetic judge, which in Cook County with the right introductions is not impossible, they could potentially seek annulment. And if there's an annulment, the question of the prenuptial becomes complicated because it was signed under, there is no prenuptial. Dead silence. "Serena," Luca offered. "I told him we didn't need one." She could feel her brother's expression through the phone, the particular configuration of his face when she'd done something he understood completely but wished she hadn't. "We were getting married, Miles. I wasn't going to start it with a legal document about what happened when it ended." "Okay?" His voice was careful, steady, the voice of a man recalibrating in real time. "Okay. So if they succeed in getting the marriage invalidated and there's no prenuptial framework, then any assets acquired jointly during the marriage period become subject to, they don't want the assets." The clarity arrived like cold water. "They have enough assets. They don't need mine." She stood very still. "They want Luca." A beat. "They want to cut me out," she said. "They want the marriage gone. They don't care about money. They want him back inside the family structure without the complication of me in it. And they're going to use a fraud claim to do it because it's the one thing that gives them legal standing and because—" She stopped. The next part was harder. "Because they know it will make Luca doubt me, even if he doesn't want to. The claim is designed not to win in court. It's designed to plant something." Miles was quiet. "How long have I got?" she asked. "Geese will expect a response from your counsel within 72 hours before they escalate. Get Hartman, their family's primary litigation attorney, the one who made opposing counsel physically uncomfortable to be in the same room with. Get her on it today. Don't wait for business hours. Already left her a message. A brief pause. Serena, does Luca know? She looked at the window, pale gray light beginning at the edge of it. 5:15 in the morning. Not yet, she said. She called him at 7. He picked up immediately, which meant he'd been awake, which meant he hadn't slept any better than she had. I need to see you, she said. I was going to call you at... Now, Luca, I need to see you now. A short silence. I'll come to you. He was there in 20 minutes, still in yesterday's shirt, the tie gone, jacket gone, the look of a man who had spent the night thinking rather than sleeping, and had the specific hollowness behind the eyes that came from that. He came through the door, and she could see him doing the thing he always did when he arrived somewhere, reading the room, reading her, assembling data. She handed him her phone with the screen showing Miles's most recent text, which contained the case filing number and Geiss's name. She watched him read it. He went through about 3 distinct expressions in the span of 10 seconds. She tracked them the way you track changes in weather. First the reading expression, neutral and fast. Then something tightening. Then the flatness. The absolute zero. The face he put on when something had made him angry enough that he no longer trusted what he might do if he let it move. He handed the phone back. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to her for a long moment. My mother, he said, not a question. The filing is in her name. The preparation is your uncle's. He said nothing. He had it ready before the dinner, she said. The dinner was evidence collection. The witnesses, Edmondo, the conversation about my background, all of it went into the supporting documentation for the fraud claim. She kept her voice level. She needed him to hear the information clearly, without her feelings wrapped around it. He knew I had something to hide because the investigation found gaps. He didn't know what the gaps were, but he knew they existed. So he structured the dinner to get me to either confirm concealment through defensiveness or reveal the concealment directly. Either way, he had what he needed. Luca turned around. His face was something she had not seen before. Not anger. She knew his anger. This was deeper than anger. This was the expression of a man confronting the specific kind of betrayal that came from family, which was different from every other kind because it came from inside the architecture of everything you believed about yourself. He built a legal case against my wife, Luca said. Against my marriage. Yes. Using my family name as petitioner. Yes. He moved away from the window. He sat down on the couch, not with the controlled precision he usually brought to every physical movement, but with the weight of a man whose body had made a decision before his mind caught up with it. He sat forward, elbows on his knees, and pressed both hands over his face and held them there for a long moment. She waited. She sat across from him and waited. When he took his hands down, his face looked older. Not dramatically, not in the visible way. Something more interior, a recalculation. I need to make a call, he said. There's something else first. She kept her voice even. Before you call anyone. There's something you need to hear from me directly. He looked at her. I'm sorry, she said. I'm not sorry I hid who I was from your family. I would do that again. I don't regret understanding what they were before they knew what I was. But I'm sorry I hid it from you. You deserve to know, not because it would have changed what we built, but because you were carrying my secrets without knowing you were carrying them. She held his gaze. That wasn't fair to you. He looked at her for a long time. I know why you did it, he said finally. That doesn't make it... I know why you did it, he said again, quieter, firmer. And I'm not... I need time to sit with it, but I understand it. He leaned back, looked at the ceiling briefly. It doesn't change what I know about you, the 2 years, what I've seen. That's not... He stopped. That's not something a document changes. She felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't fully registered was tight. Okay, she said. Okay. He stood up. The purpose was back in his movement. The quality that was particular to Luca. That sense of a man who processed and then acted, who didn't let feeling idle into paralysis. I need to make 2 calls. My attorney first, then my uncle. Luca, Raphael. He said the name with a specific tonelessness. He went outside the family structure to build a case against a DeMarco, against my wife, using my mother's name without... He stopped. Something moved through his jaw. She knew. He said it slowly, working through it as he said it. She had to have known. He doesn't move without her approval on something like this. Serena had arrived at the same conclusion at 4 in the morning and had been waiting for him to reach it himself. Yes, both of them. He was very still. Together. Yes. He stood in the middle of her living room and breathed through it. She could see the actual effort, the work of containing something large enough that containing it required the whole body. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen. His face went to 0 in a way that was different from the controlled blankness. This was the 0 of someone receiving information they expected but hoped was wrong. He showed her the screen, an unknown number. But below it, a text message preview from Raphael's number sent in the same moment. Answer this. You need to hear what I found. Serena looked at the screen, then at Luca. He answered it on speaker and set the phone on the coffee table between them. A voice she didn't recognize, male, professional, the voice of someone reading from notes rather than speaking from knowledge. Mr. DeMarco, I work for Edmondo Ferrara's research firm. Mr. Ferrara asked me to communicate certain findings directly. Say what you have to say, Luca said. Yes, we completed a secondary investigation into the Whitlock family assets, the international portfolio specifically. In the course of that investigation, we identified a point of contact between the Whitlock Group's European investment vehicle and a holding company registered in the Cayman Islands. A pause. That holding company is a silent partner in 3 DeMarco operational properties. It has been for 6 years. Serena's body went completely still. The Whitlock Group, the voice continued, has been, in effect, a financial stakeholder in DeMarco operations for 6 years. The arrangement was structured through a subsidiary 2 levels removed from any visible Whitlock entity, which means that when Ms. Whitlock entered into a relationship with Luca DeMarco, the 2 families were already financially entangled, and that entanglement was not disclosed. A silence fell over the room like something physical. Serena's mind was moving very fast, not with guilt, with something colder. Backward calculation. The Cayman entity. She knew it. She knew it by a different name, through a different structure, a European acquisition vehicle her father had expanded 7 years ago without ever describing to her in detail. She had not known about the DeMarco connection. She had genuinely not known. But the voice on the phone did not know that she hadn't known. And Luca was looking at her, not with the complexity of the morning, not with the work of a man reassembling what he understood, something more direct, a question that was almost not a question because of how clearly it was sitting on his face. Serena. Her name, and beneath it, did you know? I didn't know about the connection, she said, immediately, directly, looking at him with everything open. I knew the Cayman vehicle existed. I did not know it had DeMarco exposure. I have not been involved in active management of my family's portfolio since I left. Miles handles, so your brother knew. The voice on the phone had gone silent, still present, still listening. She looked at Luca. Miles. She thought about the call this morning, the way he'd known about the dinner before she'd told him, the way he'd immediately known about Guys, the way he'd said, "Did you use the documents last night?" Not what happened last night, not "Are you okay?" Specific, targeted. Like a man who already knew the shape of the evening and was confirming a detail. She thought about Miles saying, "You know you can't actually disappear, Serena. The name follows you." She thought about 6 years. The timeline. She had been in Chicago for 4 years when she met Luca. The Cayman connection was 6 years old, which meant it predated her arrival in Chicago, which meant her family had already had financial exposure to the DeMarco operations before she ever set foot on West Huron Street in the rain with her broken grocery bags. The oranges rolling across the wet sidewalk. The man who crouched down without hesitation. The canvas bag with the Italian restaurant logo. She sat with that for exactly 3 seconds. Then she picked up her own phone and called her brother. He answered on the first ring. "Miles," she said. Her voice came from somewhere very controlled and very cold. "The Cayman vehicle, the DeMarco exposure. Did you know?" A silence that lasted precisely 1 second too long. "Serena, Miles. It wasn't—" He stopped. Started again. "It wasn't what you're thinking. Dad identified the investment opportunity years ago. It was a sound financial decision, and it had nothing to do with, did you know when I moved to Chicago? Another silence. Did you know when I met Luca? We didn't. His voice shifted. Careful now. We didn't arrange anything. We saw an opportunity, and we... Miles. Her voice had dropped very low, the way very quiet voices got when they were the last thing before something broke. Did our family have prior knowledge of my relationship with Luca DeMarco before it became public? The silence that followed was the longest one yet. And in that silence, Serena understood something that reorganized everything. The oranges, the bag, the rain, the man who didn't hesitate, the relationship that had felt so naturally, so specifically, so perfectly like the real thing she had always wanted, reorganized it all into a shape she had. The silence on the phone lasted 4 seconds. Serena counted them. She had nothing else to do with her body in that moment, except count and breathe and keep her face from doing what it wanted to do, which was collapse inward the way a structure collapsed when the load-bearing wall came out. Then Miles said, "It wasn't arranged." "That's not what I asked." "Serena, I asked if you knew, yes or no." Another pause. Shorter this time. The pause of a man who had run out of room to maneuver. Dad identified the DeMarco portfolio exposure 2 years before you moved to Chicago. It was a legitimate investment. The returns were, Miles. Yes. The word came out flat and final. We knew. The room stopped. Luca was watching her face. She could feel it without looking at him. The quality of his attention. The absolute stillness of a man waiting for information that would determine the next sequence of everything. Did anyone... Her voice caught. She pressed through it. Did anyone in our family have contact with anyone in the DeMarco family before I met Luca? The silence this time was its own answer. Miles. There was a meeting, he said, in New York, 2 years before you moved to Chicago. Dad and Rafael DeMarco, about the investment structure, about the operational properties. A pause. Luca was at that meeting. The phone felt very heavy in her hand. He was 29, Miles said, and his voice had shifted into something that was trying to be gentle and failing. It was a business meeting. There was no one planned what happened between you two. That's not... But they knew who I was, she said. When I met him, he already knew my family name. I don't know what he knew specifically. Miles. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Did Luca DeMarco know who I was when he picked up my oranges? The silence stretched. She lowered the phone. She didn't hang up. She just lowered it and set it face down on the coffee table next to Luca's phone, where the unknown voice from Ferrara's research firm was presumably still present, still listening, still doing whatever it had been put there to do. She looked at Luca. He had not moved. He was sitting forward on the couch with his elbows on his knees and his hands loosely clasped, and he was looking at her with an expression that she had never seen on him before and never wanted to see again, because it was the expression of a man who knew what was coming and had not yet decided what to do about it. Tell me, she said. His jaw moved. He looked at the floor for 1 second, then back at her. I knew the Whitlock name, he said, from the New York meeting. I knew your father. I knew the family controlled significant assets. He paused. I didn't know you specifically. I didn't know what you looked like. I didn't know you'd moved to Chicago. But when you saw my ID... The building's front desk. Yes. Something moved through his face, not quite shame, something more complicated and more painful than shame. When she looked me up to give me your number, I saw the name. Serena stood up. The movement was automatic, her body making a decision before her mind had completed the thought. She stood in the middle of her living room with her coat still half on from the night before, and the morning light coming gray and cold through the window. And she felt something move through her chest that she could only describe as structural, the feeling of something fundamental giving way. You knew, she said. I knew the name. I didn't know. You knew the name and you called me anyway. You took me to dinner anyway. You let me believe... Her voice stopped. She pressed her fingers against her mouth briefly, lowered her hand. I spent 2 years in that house being told I was nothing. I endured every dinner and every comment and every time your mother looked at me like I was something she'd stepped in. And I endured all of it because I believed that you had chosen me without knowing. That was the thing I was holding on to. That was the only... She stopped again. Her voice was doing something she didn't want it to do. Serena. He was on his feet now. Don't. She took a step back. Not fear, space. She needed the space to finish the thought. Don't come closer right now. He stopped. She breathed. In through the nose, slow, the way she had learned to breathe when things required her to remain functional. Did you tell your family who I was? No. Immediate. Certain. Did you tell Raphael? No. Then why? She looked at him. Why did you let it go on? 2 years of them treating me like I was disposable. If you knew I had the resources to end that conversation at any moment, why didn't you? Because it wasn't my secret to tell. His voice was low and raw in a way she had almost never heard from him. You had made a choice to live a life outside of what your name meant. I understood that. I respected it. He looked at her with something in his face that was completely unguarded in a way that Luca DeMarco almost never allowed himself to be unguarded. And because I needed to know, too. I needed to know who you were without the name. The same thing you needed to know about me. The room was silent. Outside, somewhere below, a car horn. The city doing what it always did, indifferent and constant. Serena looked at her husband, this man with his scarred cheek and his impossible family, and the secret he had kept as carefully as she had kept hers, and felt the full weight of the situation settle into her body. Not the clean weight of a single betrayal, the complicated human weight of two people who had done the same thing to each other for the same reason and arrived at the same place from opposite directions. She might have sat with that longer. She might have found her way through it in the quiet of the apartment, in the particular silence that had always worked between them when words ran out. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. A text from a number she didn't know, containing a single image attachment. She opened it. It was a photograph of a legal document, the Cook County filing, but not the marriage contestation she already knew about. Something else. A separate filing, stamped 40 minutes ago, in a different court division. She read the header twice to make sure she was reading it correctly. An injunction application against the Whitlock Group's domestic holdings, citing the Cayman vehicle's undisclosed involvement with a family under federal investigation for racketeering. Federal investigation. She looked up. Luca. Her voice had changed. Something harder now, something operating on pure function. Your family is under federal investigation. His face went absolutely still. Since when? I don't know, but someone just used our Cayman connection to tie Whitlock assets to it. She was already moving to the desk, already pulling up her email, already calling Hartman's office on the second phone. If that injunction is granted, it freezes our domestic portfolio pending investigation. Every domestic holding, every operating entity. She looked at him. Raphael didn't just want the marriage invalidated, he wanted leverage. This is the leverage. Luca was on his phone. She heard him say 3 words to whoever answered. Short, clipped, the operational voice she recognized from the edges of his world. And then he was moving toward the door. Where are you going? She said. To end this. Luca. Raphael has been building this for months. His hand was on the door. This isn't about the marriage. This isn't about you. This is about the fact that I have been moving the family away from certain operations, and he has been trying to find a way to stop me. You were the leverage he found. He looked at her. This ends today. If you walk into that house right now, I'm not going to the house. She looked at him. I'm going to see my mother, he said. She didn't go with him. She stayed and worked because working was what she could control, and Luca going to see Viviana was something she could not. She got Hartman on the phone within 6 minutes and spent 40 minutes on a call that she would later remember as one of the most concentrated conversations of her life. Going through the Cayman structure, the federal filing, the marriage contestation, the exposure points, the counterarguments. Hartman was exactly as she remembered her. Direct, unimpressed by complications, energized by the kind of multi-front legal situation that would have sent most attorneys to their desk in pieces. The federal investigation is the priority, Hartman said. Everything else is theater. If we can demonstrate that the Whitlock entity had no knowledge of the racketeering exposure at the time of the investment, the injunction falls. The marriage contestation is weak. Fraud requires demonstrable intent to deceive in exchange for material benefit, and there's no evidence she received any material benefit from the concealment. It's a pressure play, not a viable legal claim. They're not trying to win in court, Serena said. I know. They're trying to make it expensive and visible. A pause. I'll need everything on the Cayman vehicle, structure, timeline, every communication that shows acquisition intent. You'll have it by noon. She hung up and called Miles. He answered immediately. He'd been waiting for the call. She could hear it in the way he said her name, wary, braced, the way you answered a call from someone you had hurt and hadn't yet accounted for. I need the full file on the Cayman structure, she said. Every document, every communication, everything that shows the DeMarco exposure was identified post-acquisition and not factored into the investment decision. Serena, I want to... After, she said. We can talk after. Right now I need the documents. A brief silence. You'll have them in an hour. She worked. She pulled her own records. She went through 4 years of deliberate separation from her family's financial operations and found the places where that separation had been documented. Emails declining briefings, letters directing communications to Miles, the formal delegation of management authority that she had signed when she left. She built a paper trail of absence, of deliberate non-involvement, of a woman who had genuinely not known. She was 90 minutes into it when her phone rang and the screen showed Viviana DeMarco. She stared at it for 3 rings, picked up. Viviana's voice came through with a quality she had never heard in it before. Not the conductor's voice, not the warmth as weapon, something stripped. I need you to come to the house. I'm working. Luca is here. A pause. He and Raphael... Her voice stopped. She heard Viviana breathe. Please come. She drove herself. 20 minutes through mid-morning Chicago traffic, her hands steady on the wheel, her mind running through what she knew and what she didn't, and what she would need to say when she arrived. The gates were already open when she got there. She drove through without stopping. Parked behind Luca's car and Raphael's town car, and another vehicle she recognized now. Federal issue, dark sedan, 2 men visible in the front seats, neither of them making any pretense of not being what they were. Her chest tightened. She got out of the car. The front door was open. She walked in without knocking and followed the voices to the main sitting room. Luca and Raphael were standing 8 feet apart. Not the arrangement of an argument that had just started. The arrangement of an argument that had been going for a long time and had arrived somewhere final. Both of them were still in the way of men who had burned through the kinetic phase and arrived at something colder. Viviana was in the chair by the window. Her posture was perfect. Her face was the worst thing in the room, not because of what it was doing, but because of what it was failing to do. The composure she had maintained for every dinner, every event, every orchestrated gathering. It was still there, technically, the structure of it. But something underneath had given way and the structure was sitting on nothing. Raphael looked at Serena when she entered. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were sharp, calculating, reassessing. Luca turned at the sound of her footsteps. His face, when he saw her, did something that she felt in her solar plexus. A fraction of loosening. A fraction only. The rest of him was wire-tight. You shouldn't have come, he said. Viviana called me. He looked at his mother. Something moved between them. What's happening? Serena said. To the room. To whoever was going to answer honestly. Raphael answered. There is a federal situation, he said, with the specific cadence of a man performing calm. Certain operational matters that have been under scrutiny. This is not new. It has been managed. Through my assets. Serena looked at him directly. You structured the Cayman exposure deliberately. You tied Whitlock Holdings to DeMarco operations. Not because it was a sound investment. The returns on that vehicle have been marginal for 3 years. You did it because you needed a financial connection to a legitimate family, to clean provenance, to give the federal scrutiny somewhere else to look. The room was very quiet. Raphael held her gaze. She held his. You used my family, she said, not the other way around. He said nothing, which was confirmation. And when I appeared in Luca's life, she continued, you saw the connection made flesh. A Whitlock in the family was better than a Whitlock on a document. It solved multiple problems at once. It deepened the financial entanglement. It gave you standing, and she stopped as the final piece arrived. And it gave you control over Luca. Because if his marriage was dependent on family approval, if his wife's standing in this family was always precarious, you could always use that. You could always pull the thread. Luca was very still across the room. Except it didn't work, she said, because Luca chose me, fully, and that meant you'd lost the leverage. She looked at Raphael. So you went to the legal route and the federal route, and you put my family's assets in the line of fire to force a choice. Either I withdraw, taking the Whitlock exposure with me, or I stay and the federal scrutiny of DeMarco operations attaches to Whitlock Holdings and destroys both families. Raphael looked at her for a long moment. You're smarter than I gave you credit for, he said. I know. She didn't say it with satisfaction, just with the flatness of a fact. That was your first mistake. What was the second? He said. Not with warmth, with the edge of a man who still believed he held the deciding card. Underestimating what I would do to protect my husband. She reached into her bag. She pulled out not the original folder. That was secondary now, almost irrelevant against the scale of what the morning had become, but her phone, screen facing out, a document visible on it. She held it up so Raphael could see. My attorney filed a counter-injunction 40 minutes ago, she said. It cites the deliberate structuring of the Cayman vehicle as evidence of conspiracy to obstruct federal investigation. It names the parties who created that structure. She paused. It also includes documentation of the Cook County marriage contestation as evidence of bad faith legal action designed to coerce a federal witness, because the moment I became connected to the federal investigation through the Cayman link, I became a potential witness. And filing a fraudulent marriage claim against a potential federal witness is its own category of problem. Raphael's face did something small and almost imperceptible, a fractional shift, the first crack. The federal attorneys are already in your driveway, Serena said. I saw them when I came in. They weren't there for me. She looked at him steadily. Whatever you thought you had, Raphael, whatever arrangement you believed was still intact, it isn't. It ended when you put my family's name on your legal filings. The silence in the room was the loudest thing she had ever heard. Luca crossed the room. He came to stand beside her, not in front of her, not positioning himself as a shield. Beside her, level, shoulder to shoulder. She felt the warmth of him on her left side, and something in her chest that had been braced since 4 a.m. Finally, the thing about a room going quiet was that it never actually went quiet. There was always something, the heat moving through old pipes, the distant sound of the city beyond sealed windows, the specific weight of multiple people breathing in the same enclosed space. Serena had learned to hear all of it. It was something that happened when you spent long enough paying attention to rooms that were trying to tell you things. This room was telling her that something had broken. Not cracked. Broken. The kind of break that didn't go back together. The kind you worked around for the rest of your life, building the new structure slightly differently to account for the gap. Raphael had not moved. He was still standing in the center of the sitting room with his hands at his sides and the fractional shift still on his face, that almost imperceptible crack that she had watched happen and that he was now, visibly, trying to reassemble. She watched him try. She watched the architecture of a man who had spent 50 years being the most dangerous person in most rooms attempt to reconstruct its certainty, and she watched it fail. The federal agents came through the front door 3 minutes later. Not dramatically. That was the thing about federal agents that movies always got wrong. They didn't announce themselves with force unless force was required. These two were quiet, professional. They had the specific neutrality of people doing a job they had done many times before. And the job right now was to speak to Raphael DeMarco about certain financial arrangements and the documentation related to them. Raphael looked at the agents. He looked at Serena. He looked at Luca. Whatever he saw in Luca's face, she didn't see it herself because she wasn't looking at Luca in that moment. It was apparently the final piece of information he needed to understand the full shape of what had happened. He went with the agents without being asked. He walked out of his brother's sitting room under his own power, with his shoulders back and his chin level, maintaining the physical vocabulary of a man who had not been defeated because maintaining it was the only thing left to maintain. She watched him go. She felt nothing in particular about it. No satisfaction, no triumph, no relief yet. Those were feelings for later. Right now, there was only the flatness of a situation resolving. The particular emptiness that followed sustained tension when the tension finally released. The front door closed. Viviana had not moved from the chair by the window through any of it. She sat with her back straight and her hands folded in her lap, and she was looking at the space where her brother-in-law had been standing with an expression that Serena could not read and did not try to. Luca stood beside Serena for a long moment after the door closed. Then he moved to a chair across from his mother and sat down. He was very tired. She could see it now that the wire tension had left him. Not just the tiredness of the night without sleep, the deeper kind. The tiredness of a man who had spent months, possibly longer, carrying the awareness of a collision coming, and now it had come. The three of them were alone in the room. Serena sat. Nobody spoke for what felt like a long time. Then Viviana said, without looking away from the window, "I didn't know about the federal investigation." Luca looked at her. "I knew about the legal filing." Her voice was even, not defensive. There was no energy in it for defense. It was the voice of someone making a record. "The marriage contestation. Raphael told me it was necessary. He said she was hiding something that would damage the family. He said—" She stopped. Her hands moved slightly in her lap, then stilled. "He said a great many things. I believed them because I wanted to believe them." "Mama, let me finish." She looked at her son then. Her eyes were dry. Whatever was moving through her was moving through something internal, unavailable to the surface. "I believed them because I had already decided that she was wrong for you, before I knew anything about her, before she walked through that door the first time. I had already decided." She looked at Serena. "Because she was not what I had imagined for you. She did not come from the world I understood. And I told myself it was about protecting you, and protecting the family, and protecting the name. But that was—" A pause. "That was not honest. It was simpler than that. She was not what I chose. And I am a woman who has spent her entire life believing that what she chooses matters." The window light was gray behind her. The room was very still. Serena looked at Viviana DeMarco, this woman who had made 2 years of her life a sustained exercise in endurance, who had deployed every social weapon available to her with the precision of long practice, who had signed her name to a legal document designed to erase Serena's marriage, and waited to feel the anger that should have been there. It wasn't anger exactly. It was something more tired and more complicated. "I know," Serena said. Viviana looked at her. "I knew from the first dinner," Serena said. "It wasn't about what I'd done. It was about what I was." She held the older woman's gaze. Not with softness. She was not going to perform softness in this room. Not today. But without the heat she'd expected from herself. "You'd made your decision before you met me. Everything after that was just finding evidence to support it." Viviana's jaw moved. Something in her face worked. "Yes," she said finally. The single syllable of a woman who was not accustomed to concession and was doing it anyway, in front of her son, in the wreckage of a plan that had broken every direction at once. Luca was looking at his mother with an expression that Serena recognized, the expression of someone who loved someone and was also holding an accounting of what that love had cost them. Both things simultaneously, neither one canceling the other out. "We need to talk about Raphael," he said. His voice was quiet and carried weight. "About what he built and how long it's been in place, about the federal exposure, about what the family does from here." "I know," Viviana said. "I've been trying to move operations away from the arrangements he maintained. For 2 years I've been—" He stopped. He knew. He knew, and this was his response to it. He built a structure that tied the family's legal exposure to external assets so that any attempt to reform the operation would destroy someone else along with it. He looked at Serena. "Your family's assets were the ones he chose. Because of you. Because he knew it would force a choice I couldn't make cleanly." "What choice?" Viviana asked. "Between the family and my wife." The window light shifted slightly as clouds moved outside. The room breathed. "There is no such choice," Serena said. Both of them looked at her. "There's no version of this where those are the two options. That's the framing he built. That's the trap inside the trap. Force a choice between two things that shouldn't be opposites, make it so that any decision damages something, then stand back and watch." She looked at Luca. Raphael counted on us not being able to think past the framing. He counted on the marriage being fragile enough that the additional pressure would crack it. He was wrong about that. Luca held her gaze. But he wasn't entirely wrong about the exposure, she continued. The Cayman connection is real. The federal scrutiny is real. My family's assets are genuinely entangled in it, not by our intent, but by the structure he built. Hartman can argue non-knowledge, and she'll be right. But that process takes time and money and visibility that my family does not want. She paused. We need to clean it the right way. Cooperate with the investigation where it's warranted, restructure the Cayman vehicle to remove the DeMarco exposure, and create a documented record of the Whitlock Group's distance from the operational aspects of whatever is under scrutiny. Viviana was watching her with an expression she'd never worn in Serena's presence before. Not warmth, not yet, perhaps not ever completely, but attention. Genuine attention. The particular look of someone revising an assessment they had held with great confidence. You'd do that, Viviana said. You'd involve your family's resources in cleaning this. I'm already involved. He made sure of that. She looked at the older woman steadily. I can either fight the involvement or I can use it. The second option is faster and it protects everyone, including people who don't particularly deserve my protection. She paused. That's not generosity. That's arithmetic. A long silence. Then Viviana said quietly, and without her usual architecture of control around the words, I misjudged you. Yes, Serena said. You did. It was not forgiveness. It was not reconciliation. It was two women stating facts in the same room without the social machinery that usually ran between them, and it was more honest than anything that had passed between them in 2 years. The legal process took 4 months. Hartman was as effective as advertised. Methodical, aggressive where aggression was warranted, precise where precision served better. The Cayman vehicle was restructured within 6 weeks. The Whitlock exposure documented as non-operational and non-knowing, and the federal investigators, once presented with the full record of how the entanglement had been constructed and by whom, shifted their focus to where it actually belonged. Raphael was indicted in the 8th week. 3 counts. His attorney was very good. It didn't particularly matter. The Cook County marriage contestation was withdrawn before it ever went to hearing. Hartman's counterfiling had done its work efficiently and without drama. The bad faith argument was strong enough that proceeding would have made things considerably worse for the parties who'd filed it. Miles came to Chicago in the 3rd month. Serena met him at a restaurant in Lincoln Park. Not her neighborhood, neutral ground, a place that meant nothing to either of them, and therefore required nothing. He arrived before her and was sitting at the table when she came in, which was unusual. Miles was never early. He was a man who arrived at precisely the moment he chose to arrive, which was generally exactly when it suited him. He was early because he was nervous. She could see it in the way he was sitting, too still, the particular stillness of a man managing himself carefully. She sat down. The waiter came. They ordered without looking at the menus because neither of them was there to eat. I want to explain, Miles said. I know you do. The meeting in New York, it was business. It was always business. Dad identified the DeMarco portfolio because the properties were undervalued and the returns on the restructured notes were Miles. She looked at her brother. He was 3 years older, same coloring, same quality of attention that ran through the Whitlock family like a trait inherited alongside the bone structure. I know it started as business. I know no one planned what happened between me and Luca. She paused. What I want to know is why you didn't tell me after it happened. After you knew I was with him. You had a year, at minimum a year, where you knew about the Cayman exposure and you knew I was in a relationship with someone connected to it, and you said nothing. Miles was quiet. Why? She said. He looked at the table, then at her. The thing about Miles was that he was, underneath the apparatus of the Whitlock family operation, an honest man. It was sometimes inconvenient for him. It was inconvenient now. Because you were happy, he said. For the first time in years, you'd built something real, and you were happy in it. And I knew that if I told you about the connection, you would have ended it. Not because it was rational, because you would have believed it tainted what you had. You would have looked for the manipulation in it even when there wasn't one. He looked at her. I was wrong not to tell you, but that's why. She sat with that. She thought about the morning in her apartment in the dark, working backward through 2 years of memories looking for the manipulation, looking for the seam where artifice began. She thought about Luca on his knee on a wet Chicago sidewalk picking up oranges. She thought about every dinner at the estate, every look from Viviana, every comment from Bianca, endured because she had believed she was protecting something real. She thought about how it had felt when she understood that Luca knew her name, the specific quality of that feeling, the floor dropping. She thought about his face when he said, "Because I needed to know too. I needed to know who you were without the name." "You were right about one thing," she said finally. Miles looked at her. "It was real," she said. "What we built. It was real in spite of everything around it, not because of it. Not because of the meeting in New York or the Cayman connection or any of the machinery that was moving underneath it." She looked at her brother. "It was real because of who he is and who I am and the specific collision of those two things on a street in the rain. None of the rest of it changes that." Miles was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm sorry. I know." We're family," she said. "That doesn't go away because you made a bad call." She picked up her water glass. "But you will not make decisions about my life on my behalf again. That ends today." He nodded once, clearly, the nod of a man accepting terms. They stayed for an hour. They talked about other things, their mother, the estate in Connecticut, a restructuring in the European portfolio that had nothing to do with any of the previous month's events. Normal conversation, family conversation, the kind that continued because families continued, even carrying their damage. When she left, she felt lighter than she had in 4 months. Not fixed, not resolved in the clean way things were resolved in stories where everyone learned and changed and arrived at a definitive better. Lighter in the specific way of a burden redistributed, still present, different to carry. Tung. Bianca came to the apartment in the 4th month. Serena opened the door and found her standing in the hallway with no makeup on, which was the first time in 3 years she had seen Luca's sister without the full presentation, the careful face, the curated everything. She looked younger without it, smaller. The sharpness still there in the bone structure, but without the surface lacquer, it was just a face. A person's face. She was holding an envelope. "I wrote it 3 times, Bianca said. "The letter. This is the 3rd version." Serena looked at her. "The first 2 were too long," Bianca continued. "I kept explaining myself, trying to make you understand why I—" She stopped. "But that's not— You don't need my reasons. My reasons are not your problem." She held out the envelope. Serena took it. "I was cruel to you," Bianca said. Her voice was steady in the way of something that had been practiced. "Not just unkind. Cruel. And I told myself it was because of the family or the name or because you weren't. But that's—" She looked away briefly, looked back. "I was threatened by you. From the beginning. I couldn't identify what you were because you didn't behave the way I expected. You didn't perform weakness, and you didn't perform strength. You just were. And I didn't know what to do with that, so I made you small so I could understand where you fit." Serena stood in the doorway with the letter in her hand. "I don't expect anything from this," Bianca said. "I'm not asking for— I just wanted you to have it from me directly. Not through Luca, not through Mama. From me." A pause. "Okay," Serena said. Bianca looked at her. "Okay, meaning I heard you." Serena held her gaze. "I'm not going to tell you it's fine. It isn't fine. What you did over 2 years compounded in ways that you're not fully aware of and that I'm not going to itemize for you today." She paused. "But I believe that you mean what you said, and I'm not interested in carrying your cruelty around for the rest of my life. That's not something I want to spend myself on." She held up the letter slightly. "I'll read this." Bianca nodded, something in her face, not relief exactly. Something earlier than relief. The thing that came before relief, when you weren't yet sure you'd earned it. She left without being shown in. Serena watched her go down the hallway and thought about what it cost to show up at a door without your armor on, and say the simple true thing with nothing around it to cushion the impact. She thought, that's not nothing. She thought, that's not enough either. She thought, most things that matter are both of those at once. Viviana's calls started in the 5th month. Not to Serena, to Luca first, which was expected. Then one evening, Serena's phone showed Viviana's name, and she stood looking at it for a long moment before she picked it up. I don't know how to do this, Viviana said. No preamble, no social machinery, just that. The words of a woman in her 60s who had operated inside a specific set of rules for her entire life and was now standing outside them with no map. I know, Serena said. I want to... A pause. I want to try, to do it differently. I don't know if I am capable of that. I have been... The pause was longer this time, and in it Serena heard something she had never heard from this woman, which was the sound of genuine uncertainty. I have been the way I am for a very long time. It is not easily different. No, Serena said, it isn't. But I would like to try. Serena stood at her kitchen window looking out at the street below, the city going about its evening business in the way the city always did. Indifferent, continuous, moving at its own pace regardless of what happened in particular rooms between particular people. Then try, she said. Not warmly, but not closed. That specific distance between cold and open that was the only honest place to stand when the wound was real and the door was being offered anyway. They talked for 20 minutes. They talked about Luca, the thing they both had in common without qualification, the fixed point around which everything else had to organize. They talked about what the family looked like going forward, with Rafaela's absence and the restructuring that Luca was undertaking. They talked carefully and without pretense, and it was not a reconciliation. It was a first step in the direction of one which was different and harder and more honest. When she hung up, she sat at the kitchen table for a while. She thought about what she had wanted when she moved to Chicago 6 years ago. She had wanted to be chosen. She had wanted to know what she was worth to the world when the name was removed and only the person remained. She had gotten that answer, and it had cost more than she'd anticipated, and the cost was not evenly distributed. Some of it had landed on people who hadn't fully chosen to pay it. That was the part she sat with longest. Not the cruelty she'd endured, not the legal machinery, not the Cayman exposure, not the months of sustained pressure. The part she sat with was simpler and harder. She had kept a secret that was also Luca's to know. She had made a choice about his information and called it hers to make. She had been right in the end about what it revealed, about the family, about who she was to them, about the shape of the world she was entering. She had been right, and it had still cost him something he hadn't agreed to pay. That was the thing about being right. It didn't make the cost disappear. She heard the door and looked up, and Luca was there, coat still on, the tiredness that had been in him for months slightly different tonight, lighter. She could see it in the set of his shoulders. Hartman called, he said. Good news? Final sign-off on the restructuring. Federal inquiry is closed on the Whitlock side. He came into the kitchen and set his keys on the counter and looked at her at the table. It's done, she breathed. The particular breath that came when something you'd been braced against for months finally stepped back. Not a gasp, just a long, slow release. The body doing its accounting. Okay, she said. He sat down across from her, not immediately touching her. They had spent the last months doing a quiet recalibration, building back through the layers that the night of the folder and the morning of the phone call had complicated. It was not broken. It had never been broken. But honesty at that level left marks, and they had been careful with each other's marks. He looked at her across the kitchen table. I want to ask you something, he said. Ask if you could go back. The first dinner, the first time you walked into that house. He paused. Would you still have stayed quiet? She thought about it. She gave it the weight it deserved instead of the easy answer. About who I was to the world. Yes, she said. I would have stayed quiet about that, because that was mine to keep, and I don't regret keeping it. She held his gaze. But about who I was to you? About the name? About the fact that you already knew it? No. I would have asked you sooner. I would have put that on the table before it got used against us. He nodded slowly. And if I had told you, that first night in the car, before you went up, if I had said I knew your name from the meeting, What would you have done? Honestly? Yes. She looked at him. This man she had chosen and who had chosen her, and who had kept her secret as carefully as she had kept his, for reasons as complicated and as human as her own. I don't know, she said. I might have ended it. She paused. I might have thrown away the real thing because I couldn't see past the fact that it started on impure ground. She paused again, longer. Which would have been wrong. Yes, he said. So maybe we both made the calls we needed to make to get here. Maybe, he said. That doesn't clean it up. No, it doesn't. They sat with that. The kitchen quiet around them, the radiator doing its familiar ticking, the city outside at its evening register. The ordinary texture of a life they had built and defended and were continuing to build in the space that remained. He reached across the table and turned his hand palm up. She put hers in it. His hand closed around hers, not tight, not performing anything, just present, the specific warmth of it. They stayed like that for a while, not talking, not needing to, the way they had always been able to do from the beginning, and which nothing in the intervening years had taken from them. This particular quiet, this particular presence, the two of them in a room together with all the weight of everything they'd been through and the simple, persistent fact of each other. Outside, the city moved. Lights came on in windows across the street. Traffic shifted and reorganized at the intersection below. Somewhere to the east, the lake was doing what the lake always did, existing in its own vast indifference, the water moving against the shore in the dark, caring nothing about what had been survived or decided or lost or held onto in the rooms of the city along its edge. Serena looked at her husband's hand around hers. She thought about what her mother had said. Power isn't something you perform, it's something you choose to reveal. She thought about the woman they had decided she was before they knew who she was. The woman who came from nothing, who had nothing to offer, who would eventually fail some test of worthiness that they had designed and administered and judged. She thought about sitting at those dinner tables with everything she was held in careful check, waiting, enduring, paying the cost of silence, because the truth wasn't ready yet. She thought, I would not do it differently. And then, more quietly, more honestly, except for the parts where I would. That was the real thing, not the clean lesson, not the simple arc from endurance to triumph. The real thing was messier and more specific and more human than any version that could be summarized. Two people who had kept each other's secrets for their own reasons, in a family that had tried to use them against each other, and had come through it not unscathed but intact. Still here, still choosing each other with full information, finally, all the cards on the table, nothing held back. That was not a small thing. In the months that followed, they used what they had, both of it, the Whitlock resources and the DeMarco reach, redirected towards something that didn't require legal exposure to sustain, to fund a foundation. It started with 3 programs: educational support for children in the Chicago neighborhoods that had given Serena her quiet years, legal aid for families caught in the machinery of systems too large to navigate alone, and vocational development for young people aging out of the foster system. By the end of the first year, it had expanded to 4 other cities. They did not announce it with their names attached. That was Serena's condition, and Luca had not hesitated before agreeing. The work was the point. The visibility was not. Viviana came to a dinner at their apartment in the 7th month. She brought wine she had chosen carefully and said very little that was not genuine. It was not comfortable. It was not warm in the way warmth looked when it was easy. It was 2 women seated at the same table making the sustained effort of beginning again, and that effort was visible in every pause and every careful sentence, and Serena thought, good, it should be visible. It should cost something. That's how you know it's real. Bianca called on a Tuesday in the fall with a question about the foundation. She'd heard about it through a mutual contact and wanted to know if there was a volunteer component. Serena told her there was. Bianca showed up the following Saturday and worked for 4 hours without talking about herself once, which was the most telling thing she had ever done. Miles flew in for a long weekend and helped restructure the foundation's European giving strategy, and they argued twice and agreed 3 times and went to a bar afterward and stayed until it was too late, and talked about their parents and their childhood and all the things that had been true before the family became an institution and they became its functionaries. The world did not become simple. People did not become better in the clean, complete way of stories that resolved neatly. Wounds remained wounds even when they scarred over. Trust was rebuilt in the slow way all real rebuilding happened. Not with a gesture, not with an apology, but with the accumulation of days in which people did what they said they would do. Serena understood, by the end of that year, that she had gotten what she had come to Chicago for. Not cleanly, not in the way she had imagined it, standing in that Wicker Park apartment 6 years ago with her deliberate ordinary life arranged carefully around her, but genuinely. She had been seen without the name and chosen without the fortune, and the seeing and choosing had held even when the name and fortune arrived in full force. She had also learned something she hadn't gone looking for, that the desire to be chosen without your history was not purely noble, that there was something in it that was also about control, about wanting the story to go the way you had written it, about the difficulty of accepting that other people carried their own histories into the same space, and that those histories had their own weight and their own complexity, and could not simply be removed because you needed the scene to be clean. She had wanted a pure thing. She had gotten a real thing instead. She thought, sitting in her kitchen on a winter evening with Luca across from her, and the Foundation's third-quarter report open on the table, and the radiator doing its reliable clanking, and the city outside doing what the city always did, she thought that real was better than pure, that it always had been, that the mess was the proof of the substance. That was not a small thing either. Outside, the lake pressed dark against the city's edge. The water moved the way it always moved, on its own terms, at its own pace, indifferent and permanent and there. And Serena Whitlock sat in the life she had built with her whole self finally visible in it, and let the quiet be what it was.